Hello and good evening from Frankfurt. Hello to everybody here and everybody on the screens and whoever watches it later on. Today, I welcome an all-female panel, which is all-female by accident, because they are the correct experts to invite. And that is, of course, the best panel you can get if you just invite the right experts. This is our last evening of our third season of Neuen Frankfurt meets White City Tel Aviv, or Context, Kontrast and Continuity, which we started during the pandemic, and we are very happy still and again that this time we can have guests on the podium and guests in the audience, for real. Let me say a few thank yous. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Andrea Jürges. I'm the Deputy Director of the German Architecture Museum, and we organized all 3 seasons of our talk together with the Ernst-May-Gesellschaft and together with the Liebling House, and that proved to be very fruitful, interesting and exciting. I want to say thank you to those who made this entire series and also the 3rd season possible, which is the Federal Ministry for Housing, Urban Planning and Building of Germany, the Urban Planning Department of the City of Frankfurt, and for this season also the Freunde des Dam, the Association of Friends of our Architecture Museum. I want to say thank you to the Liebling House. Sharon is on the left. She will do the moderation, be the moderator today, for, as I said before, our long-lasting, fruitful and interesting collaboration. I want to say a big thank you to the Ernst-May-Gesellschaft, and for this season especially Christina Treutlein, for reaching out and inviting experts not only from Tel Aviv, but also from other partner cities of Frankfurt. Today from Krakow, last 2 times from Milan and from Prague. That proved to be a wonderful enrichment of our discussions, and I really enjoy that. And I want to say thank you to everybody who ever listened, who watches it, and who hopefully finds the discussions interesting and maybe considers what we discuss valid for their daily life and business. And now I hand over to Sharon for the evening. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Andrea, for hosting us here. It's a pleasure to finally also arrive in person from Tel Aviv with a delegation. So this evening specifically, I think, is very interesting. It's sort of the closing event, but I think with the topics we have curated for today, we kind of make a sort of a spagat between the past and present and future, which is actually what this whole project is really about. And I think it is also amazing to see how in the last sessions we had, we discovered that there's so many similarities between Frankfurt and Tel Aviv, although one is in Europe and one is in the Middle East. We have similar questions and challenges that we face, both in development of the city on one hand and how to actively also take care of it in sustainable manners and conservation on the other. So I think this evening today is really rounding it all about, and I'm very honored to invite all those international guests to speak with us today. The first one is going to be Susanna Kahn, doctor, engineer and landscape architect. She's a professor of theory and methods of open space planning and design, teaches and researches on historic gardens and their monument protections, requirements, as well as open space development in a socio-spatial context. And I think you're originally from Frankfurt as well, so that's nice to have you here with us. And we in Tel Aviv are very interested in MIGE, so please, Susanne.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. So we need the... Okay, Yeah, in the following 15 minutes, I would like to explain the garden concept of Leberecht Migge and a part of his settlement open space concept. I think what is important is that both fit together and they are combined. For him as a specialist, these both building tasks were not separate, but he started with the gardens and then he translated it somehow in the settlements. Migge had in his career several towns. You see, he started in Hamburg, his professional life, at the studio of Jakob Ochs, and then he one of the most famous studios for garden architecture in this time. Then he preferred to stay self-employed. 1913, he left Ochs and worked in his own office, and then just moved to another place. But it was a very special place. It was an artists' colony, Worpswede, near Bremen, where he then continued his work in his own office. He established himself as a well-known landscape architect or garden architect, how he was called in this time, for settlement planning in the 20s. And we are very lucky to find his plans in our archive, to have found the plans, 320 plans, a part of his legacy, and 53 projects which we could analyze in the last how many years? 5 years or something. So we are very, very close engaged with Leberecht Migge. Our project started with the production of a book with an annotated collection of his plans, and then the next book will be published in next autumn. We are very eager and excited that it will be on the market. The research project was founded by the National Fund of Switzerland. Yeah, Migge did start his career in the crisis, so social crisis, economical crisis, and he was very touched by the wake-up call. For example, in the town planning exhibition in Düsseldorf, where experts could inform about the incredible conditions in towns and the incredible conditions for the health, especially for babies. And so he said, all this would be unthinkable if the big cities had enough gardens. In 1913, he published a very fundamental theory for him. It's a very broad thinking theory where he's talking about the landscape of the city, where he's talking about garden culture of the 20th century. So continuously he developed his ideas for social and green vision for the city. And that's something new we discovered. Normally he is valued and honored for his work for settlements and for allotment gardens. But we saw that he all the time he worked in all tasks. So he had as well very wealthy people where he was commissioned for private parks or for gardens, even in the light time when he was living in Worpswede, in this milieu of the artists. And all garden types, that was his conviction, should deliver or contribute to solve social and functional problems of the city. That was the mission he had. So the circumstances, just some pictures in the next two slides. You probably know that it was a very interesting time where theory developed in a new way. Design and architecture had to be thought and practiced in a new way, and the rhythm was a very important word. Function and type were very important subjects. Where, for example, the Werkbund did discuss and debate a lot. What is the new way of designing? What is the necessary way of thinking for the adequate open space and architecture in our times? In the garden architecture, we have the change from the landscape scheme to the architectural tonic garden, but even this scheme was not what was not good for in the view of Migge. He says this is too stiff, it's too spatial, it's too static, and he wanted to change even the architectural garden. He orientated himself on the functional concept of, for example, Friedrich Bauer and other reform colleagues, and sought their contact. The garden architecture of the 20th century, his fundamental garden theory, he referred to the ideas of Lebensreform on one hand, and the Werkbund on the other hand. And his basic thinking was we need gardens made for simplicity, usability and economy. Einfachheit, Brauchbarkeit und Wirtschaftlichkeit. And what is interesting, his book is not a manual for designing good gardens, but it is actually, and that's something what David Hannay already worked out, is a very good, very important scientist concerning Leberecht Migge. Migge believed that the garden is made for cultural change. We should really change our urban culture with the help of gardens. So, first example is already known. That's the garden of his own for his own family, and that's the functional layout you see here. You see the different areas for different usage. And what is important as well, not only these subspaces are created, but the boundaries which they framing these spaces, they are different. So he's not an architect who is thinking in walls and thinking, well, I decide I want to build this space with spruce trees, or I want to build it with red beech hedges, and then this decision is for all the different spaces. But he changed the boundary dependent on the different demands of the neighboring space, or the different demands of transparency or something. He created really interesting and very specific pictures, and as you perhaps see, it is garden architecture already influenced by natural ideals. Vision of the garden is influenced by experiences of landscape, but he's very serious in doing an architectural garden and not a naturalistic garden. The backyard is divided, it's very good to see how he divided the space in a kitchen garden, the children's garden, and a house place. That's the substitute for the, normally behind the villa you had the terrace, and it was very representative, and here you have a very good usable family place. So the usability is in the first hand. The second example is the garden for Miss Weitz. It's as well simple, practical, and with clear structure. He has to transform a landscape scheme from the 19th century to a usable architecture garden in the sense of Migge. And in the pencil sketch on the right-hand side below, you see the basic structure, which is very clear. Similar to the former landscape scheme, because it's economical thinking. He doesn't want to change the whole space. He wants to use the resources he had. And then he transformed these two spaces in usable garden spaces. So you could go to the roses. Before there was a rosarium in the landscape garden, and you could only look at it, and you can cross the lawn. In the landscape garden, it was not so used. People were not used to use the lawn in this way, and you have a very economic way of putting paths into this garden. And so it's again an economical thinking. These are some pictures, clear structure and accessible garden paths. Is the garden a space? That was a rhetoric question of Migge. Of course, he said, yes, it is a space. And he was not the only one, of course. It was a tendency in this time. And he rejected clearly the design and principles of the landscape garden with its picturesque approach. And interesting is his quote, the difference between the geometrical aspect of a garden and the architectural aspect. He says geometrically indicates surface, architecturally is space. The geometry is the house ground plan, and the architecture is, for example, a forest clearing. So even the landscape can have a space, a framed space. And when he remembered his own work for Max Emden, he rejected his former design and said this garden was too strongly rooted in architecture garden theory, and nowadays we remember the abundance of the growth again. So that means the garden has to be a green room, and the growth of the plants was for him a very, very important aspect. Then plants have as well a productive aspect. That's the garden for a country estate, Henning in Bad Rosshausen, 1918 in the north of Germany. And he had to design a productive garden. Not only did he organize an efficient vegetable and fruit garden with an orchard at the south terrace of the house, but he also combined the necessary economy of the space with careful designed common areas. And where you see the arrows, there are some common spaces. An arbor, a pavilion, and a lake with an island and a purple round planted space for recreation. So he integrated very clear and very very skillful the beauty into the efficient garden. This garden is as well framed, a space, a kitchen garden is part of the design. So the first conclusion for the private gardens is that his concept is based on usefulness and economy of use of space. He achieved it through the organization of space and adequate plant use. The tectonic of the garden is the baseline for Migge. Garden is a space for him. But plants form as well informal areas, and because the the free growth is a contemporary idea, close to nature, aesthetics of the Lebensreform movement. So for settlements, I have brought you two examples. Try to be in time. So Mige has 41, worked in 41 settlements, settlement projects, and he worked together with well-known architects like Wagner, May, and Bruno Taut. And they all appreciated his approach, and at least he developed a growing city as well. That's a very special idea. Then later on, we see the beginning of this. So in 1918, Martin Wagner began to build the Lindenhof cooperative house estate on urban land for 550 flats. And you see the basic structure, two-story row houses, each with 4 elongated garden areas, and in these gardens you see the structure of the trees and the Erbes for the infrastructure for the garden work. Gardens in the large court on the left-hand side, and the open spaces for the community on the right side. Then Mige had the opportunity to to do what he loves to do, to design very precise the gardens, the dimension. He was in his element. He worked out divisions of space and planting plants for vegetables around the year. And admittedly, the inhabitants of the colony did not adhere to the horticultural plant economy for long. And they displaced the vegetable cultivation with crop fruit due to the lower garden care they require. So the inhabitants changed actually the
terrible
plan. So here, a very interesting open space for the public. I go further because we have not enough time. So these are very good examples for for long-lasting design, because that's a photo from last winter, and it is a listed settlement. Okay, and the last one is just this picture. I guess I'm over the time otherwise, but what is interesting here, you see on the right-hand side a cooperative garden as a working and yield community for a large group of gardeners, and on the rest, or the left-hand side, the small plots, you see the leasehold gardens as we know it today as well. But what is interesting here is the gardeners have together the infrastructure, like the irrigation and the compost, and the spaces are designed very carefully, and we have common facilities, community facilities as well in the concept. So he is thinking for this area as a garden city, as an allotment garden city. So I come to the end when I can. The organization of the space is very important, so that the dimensions are adequate for self-sufficiency. The design is at the service of practicality and use, as garden life gives garden rhythm, and garden rhythm gives design. So that's a very basic thing, a very basic idea of his approach. And the community, as I said, the community life is very important for him. Yeah, a short outlook. The next step for Mige was the technological garden, and there he radicalized a bit. In a sense, he gave up a bit the aesthetic dimension and went strongly into productivity of the garden. And yes, somehow we realized in our research that all these knowledge he gained already in private country house gardens, where he developed the basis for these concepts before 1920. My final recommendation, because we worked very long on this subject and we became more and more enthusiastic about Mige's Mige's design approach of usability and aesthetics and the combination. And so I would say, in the spirit of Mige, everywhere gardens for everyone. Thank you for the attendance.
So thank you, Susanna, for this great lecture. I learned a lot. Simplicity, usability, and economy is, I think, very important when we also talk about landscape planning today. And this is, I think, a topic which we should later on be continuing with, and maybe have a talk later on these subjects. And of course, the whole idea of the community and how it affects life or the living spaces at large, how the garden affects it. And this question I would like to continue with you, Lea von Berg, and see how perhaps this is done in the Römerstadt in Frankfurt am Main. A little bit about Lea von Berg. She is an expert in architectural heritage conservation and combines content from fields of architecture, urban planning, engineering, built heritage, preservation, and cultural studies. Talk about.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Very nice entrance for you to start with. Please, Lea.
Thank you, and thank you.
Fanfaren.
Yeah.
Fanfaren.
Thank you for the invitation.
I think we need technical assistance. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the green spaces of the Siedlung Römerstadt in Frankfurt am Main. I'm going to try not to go into too much detail, but show the historic value of the green spaces in and outside the Siedlung Römerstadt, and therefore why they should be included in monument protection. This is not working. Oh.
Try again.
It's not working.
It should work.
Susan.
It has to. It doesn't want to. It's tricky.
Professor has the magic touch.
Years of experience, no?
Yes, years of experience.
Thank you very much. Okay, Siedlung Römerstadt is located in the north of Frankfurt and on the outer edge of the Nidda Valley, which is part of the green belt of Frankfurt. On the map you can see the green belt of Frankfurt surrounding the city. The Nidda Valley is part of the green belt, and the housing area Siedlung Römerstadt is directly connected to this landscape surrounding the city. The Siedlung Römerstadt and the Nidda Valley are remarkable examples of modern architecture of the 1920s. It's an example of the new approach in architecture and urban planning in the 1920s, which still can be seen today. For the first time, the city and the surrounding landscape wasn't seen separately. The goal was to connect the city with green spaces and so connect humans with nature for mental and physical health benefits. It becomes clear that that the general master plan was planned including the green spaces of the Nidda Valley because they show this connection between housing area and the green belt of Frankfurt. Okay.
Very good.
To understand the historic value, I have
an emanation whereby nothing works, so maybe it's my business. Honestly. Yeah, really.
Of the green spaces of the Siedlung Römerstadt,
Sorry?
we have to look at the historic background and the urban planning. Due to the industrialization and social and political situation of the early 20th century, Frankfurt became more and more densely built. The apartments were too small and overcrowded, which led to a housing shortage in the city of Frankfurt. This was an enormous problem in urban development and led to resentment among the population of Frankfurt. Life in the big city was increasingly seen as inhuman, and the need for physical and mental health and social stability became increasingly important. The situation led to the ideal image of the new human in connection with nature. The social problems caused by the housing shortage should be resolved, and the goal in the 1920s and the new Frankfurt were to turn away from the overcrowded city and to remove contrasts between the city and nature. The Siedlung Römerstadt was part of the Nidda Valley project. It was built in a short time from 1927 to 1928 as a dependent satellite at the city edges. The general plan was by Ernst May, who was influenced by the Garden City movement. The design of the green spaces of the Siedlung Römerstadt was based on the plans of the landscape architects Leberecht Migge and Max Bromme. The Siedlung Römerstadt has been protected since 1972, and since 2016, the allotment gardens in the east of the housing area were included and are now protected monuments as well. So now let's look at the site today. Siedlung Römerstadt and the green spaces of the Nidda Valley are part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site application. In regards to this application, the aim of the urban monument protection analysis is to consider and evaluate the Siedlung Römerstadt in connection with its surrounding green spaces and its historical background. The relevant open spaces of the housing area and the relevant green spaces of the Nidda Valley are analyzed in the urban monument protection analysis, which you can see in this and the following maps, and are classified according to their monument value. The current state of monument protection of the Siedlung Römerstadt and the Nidda Valley are a base for this urban monument protection analysis. In this map you can see the Siedlung Römerstadt is already protected as a monument, which is the red part in this map. And the Nidda Valley is part of the landscape protection area in Frankfurt, which is the green part in this map. In the urban monument protection analysis, a distinction is made between the existing protection of the nominated World Heritage Site and historically relevant open spaces which are already part of monument protection, and open spaces worth preserving which are not part of monument protection yet, but are just as important to the integrity and authenticity of the housing area. Now we're going to look at some relevant green spaces of the Nidda Valley and why they should be protected. The green spaces of the Nidda Valley still have the same function as intended in the 1920s and therefore are of the same importance for the Siedlung Römerstadt. The open spaces are directly connected to the housing area and offer the residents an outdoor space that can be directly experienced. The Nidda Valley continues to be used for relaxation and health benefits. The River Nidda and the surrounding nature offers a rich natural outer space in the city of Frankfurt. The allotment gardens in the east of the Siedlung Römerstadt have also been preserved and added to the monument protection in 2016. The overall structure of the allotment gardens has not changed. The allotment gardens will continue to be used as such and offer the residents of the apartment buildings access to nature. Just like the private gardens within the Siedlung Römerstadt, the original plan for self-sufficiency by Leberecht-Migge was not continued, and the gardens are used individually. Therefore, the functional integrity is only partly given. Other allotment gardens have been added and continue to use the Nidda Valley as intended by Leberecht-Migge. In addition to that, different visual relationships are part of the Siedlung Römerstadt and are important to its historic value because they specifically demonstrate the connection between housing area and green spaces. This and the following maps show the visual relationships between the Siedlung Römerstadt and the Nidda Valley. This map shows different views and viewpoints from the terraces and roof terraces of the Siedlung Römerstadt. The 7 viewpoints on the terraces of the Siedlung Römerstadt have all been preserved. They are important linking points from the settlement to its surrounding green spaces. They are supposed to show the connection from the housing area to open green spaces of the Nidda Valley. This function has been preserved and the functional and structural integrity is given. However, the visual relationships are impacted by increasing vegetation. The roof terraces of the Siedlung Römerstadt have also been preserved and continue to offer the residents of the apartment buildings outdoor space connected to their apartment. The housing area and the Nidda Valley can be overlooked from these roof terraces. The visual relationship are also impacted by the increasing vegetation, which you can see on the right picture. But they still show the connection between the housing area and the Nidda Valley, and even beyond that to the city of Frankfurt. Therefore, these visual relationships are worth preserving. The Siedlung Römerstadt was clearly recognizable as kind of a white band when it was built. The housing area was planned in connection with its surroundings. So this historical photograph shows that the housing area is kind of an island in the open spaces of the Nidda Valley, which is recognizable from afar. Today, this visual relationship is impacted by increasing vegetation, and the housing area as a whole can only be seen from the Nidda Blick path, which you can see on the lower picture. This visual relationship is worth preserving as it shows the connection between the satellite and the green belts. The Siedlung Römerstadt can also partly be seen from the green areas of the Nidda Valley. Due to the location of the housing area, it is higher than the green areas in the valley. The housing area is clearly separated by the concrete wall, which visually and structurally separates the housing area from the open spaces. The housing area is easily recognizable by its color scheme. The facades of the single-family houses facing the Nidda Valley are painted white, and the apartment buildings are painted red-brown to mark the viewing terraces. The apartment buildings and viewing terraces are visually emphasized and mark the paths that connect the housing area with the open spaces. So I would like to show you a picture, but
That's better. Oh, that's okay.
okay, I think it worked. So there you can see the color scheme of the Siedlung Römerstadt. There are also important visual relationships inside the Siedlung Römerstadt. There are 4 visual axes, which you can see on as arrows on this map, where the views directly led to the Nidda Valley. In this historical photo, you can see that the Nidda Valley could be seen through visual axes within the housing area. Today, these visual axes exist because of the still existing structure and preserved walkways and viewing terraces. The original paint of the housing area is no longer preserved. Nevertheless, the color scheme of the Siedlung Römerstadt can be seen in large parts throughout the housing area. The paint is partly in poor condition and partly already reconstructed. The color scheme of the Siedlung Römerstadt is important because it clearly defines the outdoor space. The color scheme is worth preserving as it is a characteristic for the Siedlung Römerstadt and the Neues Frankfurt of the 1920s. So it shows that the green spaces of the Siedlung Römerstadt and its surroundings are decisive for their outstanding universal value. Looking at the history of the Siedlung Römerstadt, you can see that the various open spaces within the housing area, but also the landscape and nature, were integrated in the planning measures. This shows the great importance that the outdoor space had for the urban planning measures of the satellite and the green belts. In addition, the construction of the Siedlung Römerstadt shows the combination of social standards and modern production for the first time in history. It became an expression of cultural development and interchange of human values. The historic value of the Siedlung Römerstadt lies clearly in the combination of modern architecture and the green spaces in and surrounding the housing area. That's why they are to be protected as historic monuments as well. The integrity and authenticity must be preserved in order to be included as a World Heritage Site. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you, Leah, for this interesting insight into how the ideas of MEGA, which we've seen before, have been implemented here in Frankfurt. Yes, and now our journey takes us one step further to Poland. So I would like to introduce Dr. Engineer Marta Urbanska. Am I pronouncing it right? Okay. So she's a professor of the Krakow University of Technology, and she's also an architect and an architectural historian and critic. She's lectures in Poland and abroad, and she's also an author and an editor of many architectural publications. Marta has been a national delegate of the Chamber of Architects of the Republic of Poland, a member of the Civic Community for the Renewal of Monuments of Krakow. And this year, she has been appointed as an expert to the EU Mies van der Rohe Award. So thank you so much for granting us with the pleasure of having you lecture here about Poland and the urban infills and what we learn across the border.
Please.
Very much. Yes, God. That too? That has to go to... Oh, okay, but I had it. No, thank you. I'm very sorry. Thank you very much for the invitation. Could I see my presentation or should I do it myself? Probably. No? The red one? The red one is back. Okay. The red one says back and doesn't work at all. Ah, okay. So now we are at the end. Ah, never mind.
You get to see everything. It's okay.
So what do we do? What do we do, gentlemen? How do I get back to the beginning? Can you help me? Of course. That's what they are for. Thank you. Anyway, so in the meantime, I will say thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so very grateful for having invited me to Frankfurt, and thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm sorry for the length, but I indeed don't know how it happened. I studied in Frankfurt and at the Städelschule, and many, as they say in Poland, much water has flown in the Vistula River, which we see here depicted on a very accurate picture made by gentlemen Hogenberg and Braun in Cologne 400 years ago. And also quite a lot of water has flown in mine, and here Heraclitus was right, Pantarei, and all of a sudden I studied here, and then I have so many functions that I cannot believe. But I owe it to Frankfurt because they gave me eine gute Schule, die Städelschule. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I decided to speak about Kraków in the context of Poland a little bit because as an architect and also a practicing one and as a professor, we decidedly tend in Poland to design in a contextual manner. And the context of Poland is so terribly complicated. One looks at the maps and one wonders, and no wonder there is such a chaos or complication in the country, because even from looking at Poland one cannot understand where one is and what was and why. And there are two definitions of Poland which I particularly prefer. One is truly as an engineer, I love sincerity. So one is very sincere, cruel, and it says Poland is a shifting country, as you very well see at those maps. And the other, which I think is also very true, but maybe less cruel, is poetic. And it says Poland is a country east of the west and west of the east. However, there always was one focal point, that is Kraków, which we always see at all of those maps at the south of Poland. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the famous Kraków, which wasn't founded by the Romans. Yeah, they never made it through the Elbe, and they never made it through the Carpathians, but they traded a lot, Amber Trail, and so we had to make do without the Roman castra, so we built the city like we could. However, the city, the fantastic plan, UNESCO World Heritage Site as the first urban layout complete in 1976, inscribed, was actually owed to the Mongols. I have a lot of Mongolian blood because the Mongols came raiding Hungary, our neighbor, and the northern troops of Genghis Khan army burned South Poland to the core, scorched soil, and therefore we had to build New Kraków, and this is this beautiful, fantastic, regular medieval layout in this pear-shaped old town. Of course, then we were undergoing many changes, including Camillo Sitte-like layout in the 19th century. We were graced by the Austrian occupying powers. With that, the so-called plantation were planted there, these circular or curvy linear gardens, but there was still quite a lot of spaces left, and I decided to speak about the...
Not too much.
I mean, it was precise, but with emphasis. Thank you. And it worked. But there were still gaps to be filled. And one of them was even close to the sacrosanct royal castle of Wawel. So I decided to show you a few examples, or maybe umpteen examples over a dozen, of how we fill the city before the First War and how we did it after the First War, because this kind of modernism that is ubiquitous in Krakow, is very hard to be described by historians who are poring over it, trying to say that it's modernism with a cornice, or decorative school, or national expressionism, or half modernism. Actually, I think it's I call it, and because I lecture, I can do it. There are protests, but it's freedom, you know, of opinion and of art. I call it simply the Krakowian school, quite often the Krakowian decorative school. This gentleman, Adolf Loos, who looks at us in a very dapper manner, maybe something happened to his skull at the screen, but we see him here perfectly. I mean, I didn't... Well, so I'm sorry, but you all know Adolf Loos and his magnificent, so well-penned, so cruelly, brilliantly well-penned Ornament and Crime manifesto. This gentleman I adore very much. However, in Krakow he didn't make much impact, because we were rather impacted and influenced by another gentleman, of the same age, Stanisław Witkiewicz, a son of a noble Polish family. Parents were deported to Siberia by the Tsarist regime, because one could say that the national sport of Poland is always uprising against the tyranny. And we had quite a few in the 19th century. So this gentleman became from Siberia to Zakopane, mountainous region, and he, as you may see, considered himself, and rightly, a prophet of architecture. It was, by the way, ladies here, very convenient for him, because he had a lady wife who was running a pension in the mountains, so he really could be a proper prophet with no charge. But he really managed to establish, to construct a national style of architecture, and that is the gentleman Stanisław Witkiewicz leaning over the 1:10 model of the beautiful villa, and his magnificent, brilliant, innate vernacular carpenter builders who actually built this, because he constructed this style on the basis of secession and of influences of Latins and of the vernacular primitive hut, quite like Alto wrote about the beauty of the vernacular hut, but he wasn't a builder himself. So those villas were built for the Pawlikowski family, and then very many others. Zakopane was developing as a spa, mountainous spa, especially for the ill of chest, for the tuberculosis patients. And so he invented this style that was both decorative and perceived as very our own. And would you believe, even though built of wood in the mountains, it had so many wonderful details that it magnificently influenced the later events in the form of the Polish Art Deco pavilion at the Exposition des Arts Décoratifs, which won the Grand Prix for Architecture in 1925 in Paris, and nearly 200 prizes and diplomas. If Miss van der Rohe would have had an award back then, I think I would nominate it. It's actually one of our most favorite buildings, which in a magnificent form built nearly 100 years ago by the Krakowian Circle of the Artists, which wonderfully combines the cubist, the avant-garde with the folk motifs, it stylizes the vernacular, but in a truly fresh and new manner. And this was the birth of the Polish Art Deco. And all constructed, built, painted, and sculpted and furnished by the architects and artists from Krakow. And that really gave rise to what happened later in the city itself. These are the interiors with wonderful panels by one more lady. I think her spirit is here with us. She was rightly dubbed the princess of the Polish art, Teresa Stryjeńska, who, thank you, who achieved what hardly anybody does, that is, she really created her style and became a trademark, plus this magnificent, purely expressionist, but also very vernacular influenced, Gothicizing a tower copied straight from the wooden Gothic churches of Lesser Poland by built a la mode in glass with electric lighting. So this was the modernists, like Ernst May, we had them in Poland as well, the new functionalists, the objective architects, they were appalled by this building. They were appalled by this building which truly defied their taste. Vernacular, hobby horses, Highlanders, bands, it all defied the beauty, the purest beauty of Adolf Loos and of the Bauhaus. And yet, yes, that is Stryjeńska, and yet, who actually based her cultivated Art Deco style on the folk and even heathen pagan motifs as the source of identity. So that is a poem by of Jewish extraction, famed poet Julian Tuwim, who was also enchanted by the pavilion. And we have a trail of the Krakowian decorative school, and I don't know why not in red, but you know, internet, foes of decoration, maybe Loos, maybe it's his fault, you know, because I had circles showing the decorative infills. We in Krakow were actually building a city, filling it with truly beautifully modern public housing by many public institutions, which, as you see, were clearly based on the folk motifs. And even though they were influenced by German expressionism like Fritz Huger, Mendelssohn, undoubtedly, they had the vernacular touch. As you see, those were the good times when universities could afford to invest in housing for the professors. We would love to, I guess, I would love to live in such a house for the professors. Very nice. Very nice, not bad, even after 100 years. Mm-hmm. So, 1926. So those forms modeled on crystal, taken straight from Paul Scherbart and his glass architecture and the glass chain, so popular in Germany, were also very popular in Poland and applied in Krakow. Ladies and gentlemen, that is one more house by the same three architects, Ludwig, Wojtyczko, Edalia, this time already more cubist, but also very decorative. Mint condition, crystalline forms, tiles, panel, bold architecture. It all came to an end in the years 1939 to 45, following two invasions and occupations of Poland, which left two main Polish cities Vilna and Lvov devoured by the Soviet Union. Vilna is now Vilnius, the capital of independent Lithuania, and Lvov is now Lviv in the Ukraine. I heard today from Poland that the rockets have fallen on parts of most cherished Polish national heritage, now in the care of our Ukrainian neighbors. So Warsaw was destroyed in 95%, as you see. Kraków, excuse me, may I have a sip of your water? Yes, thank you. I think it's Adolf Loos still taking revenge on me. So Kraków became yes, it's Warsaw. In 1945, in spring. Ladies and gentlemen, after the so-called liberation by the Soviet Red Army, faced with such a loss, we could have thought that the magnificent tradition of Polish decorative architecture is completely lost, like this angel with the head shot somewhere between 1939 and 2009, where I took this picture. It is in Brzeżany, currently in the Ukraine. I hope no rocket falls on him, because it's truly a beautiful angel of Art Nouveau of the Lvovian sculptural workshop Petri. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, then came Lenin and his comrades, Marx, Engels, Lenin, and because Kraków was really, as I said, the only one of the 4 major Polish towns, cities, undestroyed, and moreover on the post-war Polish territory, it had to be graced by the comrade Lenin and Stalin with the construction of the new combinate steel mill that was located in the outskirts of Kraków to the east on most fertile soils, completely abstractedly from the point of view of any economic needs, with one totalitarian intent in mind: to suppress the remaining city that was deemed to be intelligentsia, bourgeois, aristocratic, reactionary, all the evils. That said, the mill itself generated the design and construction of the ideal social realist town built in the late 1940s to 1960 by brilliant architects, all of them pre-war modernists. I had the good luck and great chance of knowing Professor Stanisław Juchnowicz, co-author, co-architect, and as you see, even the socialist, realist, ideal communist town, totalitarian, was built in a very decorative manner. Neo-Baroque, you could say, social realist, but also modeled on the neighborhood units Radburn plan, so we somehow were ourselves. And now, even in the late modern times, after 56, the late moderns were trying in the very drab communist conditions to build urban infills that, however, had that little something. I truly love this architecture. I knew many of the architects who were friends of my father. They were truly struggling to instill late modern with some decorative, playful character, and I think largely they managed. And coming to the end, of course we had something Ernst May would approve of, and Gropius and the other heroes of functional architecture. We had one descent from Warsaw who built that in the 1930s. Model settlement, Siedlung, perfectly cubist, geometrical housing blocks, which were then later in the 1970s complemented by something in the same scale by more decorative in vain. Ladies and gentlemen, and then coming to the end, after 1989, when freedom broke out, we got back to our old ways, old ways which were actually epitomized by this magnificent gentleman building in Belle Epoque. And it is our dream, and I really say that as the member of the highest authorities of the Chamber of Architects of the Republic of Poland, it is our dream to have at least a little bit of a plaque, not that great, on our completed building, saying who built it, so that the position of the architect is upheld. Talowski paved the way in Belle Epoque, and then these days, after 1989, we are still building urban infills which have a little bit of the modern interpretation or reinterpretation of ornament, of decorative school, very well fitting into the context, be it revamping, rebuilding, refills, new structures. In Krakow, my worthy colleagues are trying even to build an auditorium maximum of the Jagiellonian University for 2,000 students as an infill. And even this is also in Krakow, in the outskirts. Here, laws would have approved. And ladies and gentlemen, I think the city of Krakow, as all the great cities in Poland, were truly filled with the refugees. I am showing this picture because 10.5 million people fleeing for many reasons during the last 15 months drove through Poland, and 4.5 million stayed, and we have all accommodated them. And I cannot but help this truly biblical scene, because it was an exodus. This was the greatest exodus since 1945. And all of those neighbors of ours were accommodated in our urban hearts. So they really filled the space of architecture, be it built this way or the other. I think this was a true life of the cities. And hopefully we will get back soon, when that is all over, which we hope for. We will get back to building and pondering beautiful architecture and its decorative character, rather than, and Poland on air will not mean missiles falling, which we very much hope for. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you, Marta, for this trip to Poland. It's a really new sort of field for us. But I want to thank you as well for bringing us to the spirit of the time today, because it's very relevant also for the discussion and also for the next speakers. I would just maybe want to somehow connect the whole journey that we did together, and just saying that this sort of vernacular architecture, I think, is very much what we need to persist on conserving, both here in Frankfurt and also in the white city of Tel Aviv, because modernism and also the garden city has, I think, a lot of forms and languages. And I think the task for us today is really to analyze what those great masters did back then, when they also had a lot of difficulties in their times after the world wars, and with the Industrial Revolution, and with the economical problems that we had, and also facing the whole idea of how to feed with the gardens, and how to accomplish social sort of structures with the landscape, which was really, really important back then. And it brings me back to today and the housing issues that we face today, as well as the urban planning demands of our era. And this is why I would like to introduce my two colleagues from the municipality of Tel Aviv, Jaffa. And I'm very honored that you came to Frankfurt with us today, because you have a lot of work. Tel Aviv is facing enormous issues right now, both also with housing and also with sustainability, and also the war. I don't know if it's not comparable perhaps to what happens in Ukraine, but we have our own political issues that we're dealing with, and they also come to terms in housing and urban development. So I think it's all related. I would like to introduce Naali-Joseph, who's the head of strategic planning in the engineering department of the city of Tel Aviv-Yafo. She had her private practice as an urban and social planner, and a long experience with regenerative projects. And this is why the city of Tel Aviv is very honored to have her working on the strategic planning of Tel Aviv for the future. And Ella Weber, who is her colleague from the same department of strategic planning in Tel Aviv-Yafo. She's a senior urban planner and specifically dealing with housing in the department of the engineering, and also worked with the government before. So without longer ado, please, Hagit and Ella.
So I want to connect to Susan and the agenda of Miguel, the gardens for everyone and everywhere. So how we can paraphrase it to housing, and affordable housing especially. And nowadays, with the high rise of the prices in Tel Aviv, of the housing, of the affordability for housing, and the context for for us is how we give to ensure that the strategic view, the vision of the city is to keep all kind of families and residents can afford the city, the amenities of the city, to live at the city for long term and for all life. And we need to ensure the opportunity for living by the comprehensive housing policy, and not just with incremental project of housing. That incentive to go to create policy paper, housing policy paper, that the mayor of the Tel Aviv-Yafo has a very high committed to this policy, and we try to ensure it a part of the urban planning and the developers of the city. And I'm glad to give Ella the stage to talk about the policy, the housing policy of the city of Tel Aviv-Yafo.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone in here who was engaged in these sessions. Thank you for inviting us over from Tel Aviv. And I also like to connect, I think, with everybody, because I suddenly thought that crisis is a catalyst for change. And this is definitely the case of our housing policy. And I'll explain as I go along. Hopefully better than the Mongols. Okay. So I want to put our presentation in context, so you know a little bit about Tel Aviv in numbers. So we are similar to Frankfurt in our size and our household number. Maybe our household size is a little bigger, 2.2 people, but it is small in comparison to Israel. Israel has a quite impressive birth rate, not so much so in Tel Aviv, but other towns will have like 3.2. And
we envy you.
And we can talk about that later.
We
I think it's a major problem.
We are decreasing. Holland is decreasing.
Well, everybody looks at what's bad on their, backyard.
Yeah.
But we have lots and lots of employees coming into Tel Aviv every day. We are an employment hub, and people in Tel Aviv earn more than in other places in the country, and we are above the poverty line, which means that even the poor people of Tel Aviv will earn more than poor people in other parts of Israel. And we have, as you can see, almost 216,000 residential units. Our apartment area is 8.85 square meters, sorry about that. Some say, in Israeli terms, that's pretty small, but this is good for Tel Aviv because of our small households, so they get what they need. And we construct almost 5,000 new residential units each year, but we are small in size, actually very small in size. We make way more noise about ourselves than we really are.
Even today in the news, no?
All the time in the news. We are always in the news, not always justly so. And we have a beautiful coastal line, 14 kilometers. So I'm going back to crisis makes for a catalysator. In 2007, the citizens of Tel Aviv were beginning to feel the rents climbing. And they approached the mayor on that topic. It was called the rent control struggle at the time. And luckily for us, as civil servants, the mayor back then is still our mayor now. So there's a continuity of the housing crisis and ways to deal with it for almost more than 20 years. And he said on 2007, let's think about it. Let's go for a policy paper. And we had a pioneering policy paper published in 2008 on affordable housing. It was completely new to Israel. You have to understand, I will explain it a bit later, nobody talked in that language, in those terms at the time. But times have changed. And at the time, the focus was on young families and young adults, affordable housing for young families and young adults, because they were then considered the engine for the city's resilience and the city's success. And this went on for quite a while, and successfully units were produced, populated in very small numbers, but the process was started. And then in 2017, we had a renewal of our strategic plan for the city. The first plan was in 2005 and now 2017. And then the plan, what Hagit said in her introduction, said, you've been dealing with housing in a very incremental way. Once there's a policy paper on co-housing, then the policy paper about models for the elderly, and it was not, the strategic plan said you need an holistic housing plan. You cannot go on looking at things in very small focus. And that's why we started our housing policy paper in 2020. I just want to say something that I think is in context of all this session, is that Israel has been producing social housing since its birth. You can imagine, going back from destroyed Krakow and destroyed Warsaw, you can imagine the flood of immigrants to Israel in 1948 and 1949, and the hundreds of thousands of people that need to be housed immediately. So Israel was producing a lot of social housing units, so much so that by the 70s, 25% of our residential units were social. Amazing. But we went downhill from there with the introduction of capitalism and the liberal approach to economies. And some of it was sold, some of it was sold to the people who lived there, which is socially noble, but then almost no new apartments were purchased by the government, and so this beautiful housing stock began disappearing. So when we started our policy paper in 2020, this is the middle of the pandemic, we thought, what should we concentrate on? There were so many topics we wanted to deal with. But as the data started flooding in, because our methodology is always start with collecting like lots and lots of data and then make a decision as to what you want to focus on. As the data was flooding in, and I'll talk about that in a minute, it was clear we need to deal with affordability. We could have done other stuff, but we pushed everything aside and focused on the affordability crises of Tel Aviv. You know, housing prices surged all over the world. Tel Aviv was not unique in that sense. But whereas around the world, around 2022, the surge was 11%, in Tel Aviv it was 17%. And in 2022, we were the third most expensive city in the world, according to The Economist. Luckily for us, in a bad way, when we started our project in 2020, by 2021 we were the most expensive city in the world, according to the same index. So this was quite a shock for decision makers in the municipality. And for us, it was a good way to sort of reflect how deep this crisis is. And so, talking of data, we were very lucky to have a very professional research center in our municipality, and they did surveys of the people, of our residents, and we found out, I'll go back to the first part in a minute, that 50, I'll make it a bit more general, 35% of people living in Tel Aviv, whether they are renters or owner, in 2020, 35% of them were spending more than 50% of their income on housing. And then we wanted to dive into the renters, and you can see that most people in Tel Aviv are renters, and renters spend more than 50% of their income on housing. This is very heavy burden housing situation, and it was clear what our focus was. And just to make it even more, I don't know, make the picture more severe, out of our total number of units, which you can see again here, only a bit less than 2% are sub-rental, are sub-market rental housing. And in comparison to other cities which we were looking at, we were in a bad shape. But Vienna is a mecca, public housing city. We'll never, even if we try our hardest, reach the Viennese target. But London and Seattle were a source of inspiration, because they stood where we were in 2020, 10 years before. And they introduced a very aggressive housing policy, which helped them reach those numbers. And we were aiming for those numbers. You can see in the pictures that we have some affordable housing in the city, some of it municipal, some of it on private land, some of it initiated by the government. But these are trickles of affordable housing. And our vision was Tel Aviv-Yafo will maintain a variety of its population groups. That's what Hagit started with. We die without variety. We won't be able to exist without people from all sorts of household incomes. You know, of course, the middle class is an obvious. The teachers are an obvious, the policemen, the firemen, what have you, but also the service people that, you know, work at our hotel industry, people who worked at our thriving restaurant and coffee industry. Without them, the city is gone. So we want them here to stay, and we want to find them fitting housing solutions. So as you can see in the focus, we see them as the city's vitality and resilience, and without that, none of the two can happen. And our solutions talk about long-term rental housing, because you have to understand that culturally, Israelis like to own their apartment and house.
Same in Poland.
Yeah, well, and this has been going on since Israel was born, to have your own house. And rental is considered temporary. When you're a student, if you have a young family, maybe when you're old and you can't manage to buy a house, it's not considered the optimal choice. Oh, that's way too early. Wait. Okay.
No, that's
Okay. No, this is it. Just to say, I'm reaching the end of my presentation, just to say that we decided to go for very elaborated public participation process. I think I won't go into all the people we engaged in this process. It would take another hour. But I think the most, fascinating group of people that we did participation with were the core public. And we decided we do something different this time. We construct a housing parliament whereby we teach the public as much as we can about the data we have collected and talk with them about the challenges and about the solutions. And we met with these people, you can see in open spaces, again, this is COVID, and it was a very inspiring and also a very moving experience to sit with the citizens of Tel Aviv in the room and try to make decisions together. Wait, this is way...
No,
okay. Okay. I won't go, this is another hour slide. So I'll just look into the right-hand side, because the right-hand side is about sub-market rental housing. And this is where our focus is, but we also have policy tools for market rate rental housing, but no time for them today, I think. So what we've decided to do is taking inspirations from other towns, by the way, including Frankfurt, from which we've heard of today, right, is to ask every new housing plan to allocate 15% of its residential units for affordable housing in the high-value areas of Tel Aviv, which are in Tel Aviv, the north and the center, and to do the same thing, but 10% in the lower land values of Tel Aviv, which are today south and the east of Tel Aviv. I have to say that this policy has been going on now for a year. We're going to have a birthday in a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're doing very well in the sense that there are projects in the north where we ask for 20% and we manage it, and there are projects in the south where we ask for 15%, and it's swallowed by the entrepreneurs, coming with plans on private land. Sadly for us, we ask the same from government lands. This is a sore point for us. We would have liked them to have allocated more for us, but they don't.
It's a start point for them.
But, we're optimistic. Maybe it's a starting point, and as we go along, we'll be able to argue our way for more. But the most we ask for from ourselves, from our own lands, from land owned by the Tel Aviv municipality, 50% of units have to be affordable. This is very painful for a municipality that gets 0 subsidies from the government for affordable housing. But again, it's I think the leadership of the mayor and the decision makers in Tel Aviv to go through with it anyhow. And there are 2 more things that we do. One we haven't started yet, but I think is very fascinating. It's the Affordable Housing Fund, whereby for some reason a private entrepreneur will not be able to give us the allocation, we'll ask for its money's worth and try to build it somewhere else, maybe more units, okay? Another thing that we have started, it may look very obvious into the German atmosphere or the Austrian atmospheres, is the rent assistance. Now, the government gives rent assistance to many households in Tel Aviv. There are almost 5,000 households in Tel Aviv who get rent assistance. Only it's not enough. It's just that you know that the housing burden for rent assistant people is almost 60 or 17%. Not much left to buy clothes or food, not to talk about education or culture or anything like that, or transportation. So the municipality has decided that for the every time, you know, for the amount of rent assistance, it will double. It will make the rent assistance double. So, for example, if the person was getting, I'm trying to talk in euros, if the person was getting 500 euros per month, the municipality will add on to that another 500 euros, double it, and then rent burden goes down dramatically to something like 40%, 30%. It's still a lot, of course, but it's livable, you know. So, just a last word. We have a lot of follow-up policy after we've approved the housing policy paper, housing in central business districts and transit-oriented districts, models for people with disabilities, which is a project we're starting now, financing affordable housing, and the list goes on, and the challenges go on as well.
So thank you, Ella and Gegeit, for bringing us back to what we are facing today. And I think this journey together with you, the Dam, was interesting because we were really always sort of trying to compare Tel Aviv to Frankfurt. And today we have seen that in terms of the history, we have a lot in common, like the urban planning of the Garden City and the Siedlung of Ernst May and the modernity. And also, we face the same things that you are facing in Frankfurt today with social housing and housing at large. But I would like to use this opportunity to really connect the whole sessions that we had up until today. Although some of the subjects might seem diverse at first, I think our mission today is to try to understand how we can really learn from the past, if it's Ernst May or Adolf Loos or Miguel, and to really take the opportunity to try and to figure out how to implement all that has been learned from all the crises that we had in order to strategically think about how to plan cities for the future, and with the biggest task that we have today, which is climate change. No, I mean, we can always talk about war and about burning issues of today, but the big issue of tomorrow is how to make resilient cities. And of course it has to do a lot with housing and the open spaces in between them and the quality of the cities that we create for the future. So with saying that, I would like to specifically ask you two girls from the historic point of view of the Garden City of yesterday. What can you specifically learn from both Miguel and perhaps Ernst May and implement it on the challenges that cities face today?
Well, I think we really can learn how they thought about space, how to really productively use limited space, because I think cities are growing and we have limited space. And especially in the Neuen Frankfurt, the city of Frankfurt was so densely built. Ernst May and the planners thought about how can we expand the city and use space carefully, and also with the financial crisis to really make use of urban spaces.
Yes. For the work of Leberecht Migge is characterized by his urgent force to go forward for a very social concept of design, and so perhaps the thing we could keep is not forgetting the usability of space, and perhaps use the well-proved solutions. Once more, you don't have to design perhaps everything new in a quarter. You can base on the solutions which had a good function, and that's the economic approach of Leberecht Migge, because he said, I have to build up a typology of spaces to serve the demands of the inhabitants.
Self-sufficient in a way.
Yes, in a way. And he's enfant terrible in landscape architecture, because he somehow neglected design. Mm-hmm. He said design has to serve the urban, the human demands, and it's perhaps something we can take.
Thank you. Perhaps I would like to ask you also from the Ernst May Gesellschaft, if we're talking about how to implement housing policies. I think the Ernst May Siedlung is perhaps also a good example for really economically thinking about social housing. Could you just describe in a few sentences what the policy was there back then in the Ernst May in order to create social housing?
Sorry, let me, I got one point I have in mind, what I think is an important issue. When Ernst May built this Neuen Frankfurt, it was rather, well, there was still a lot of space in this city, but he really went about it in an economic way. So he didn't build single houses on a large plot, but instead what he did, he built communities. And I think we need to think about communities, we need to think about density, and what this well-thought plan of all these Ernst May Siedlung was really the built and the unbuilt, so the green and the built together, so it's actually livable and still enjoyable, and not just a high-rise and some untreated greens in between, like in the 1970s after the Second World War, but rather thinking about the community so that actually the community cares for their greens. And I think that is important, and the density aspect for this housing. So what he did was radically dense for a large plot of land outside of the city. If we take that aspect today, that would mean we need to build a lot more denser than we actually are discussing, at least here in Germany. I think you are way denser in Tel Aviv already. But that would be my take on what can we take from Ernst May and the Siedlung to today.
Thank you. Yes. Is Krakow dealing with also the same issues?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And of course, my policy of showing only beauty is short-legged, because now we come to the terrible truth. But on the other hand, as a seasoned architect, I have to believe in Vitruvius. After all, speaking of the rumor. So it is sustainability, durability, firmity, usability, beauty. So yes, we are very much dealing with the same problems as all the large cities in Poland, only that I have to tell you something probably unbelievable. The urban planning, and even more the spatial planning in Poland, got unfortunately poured out with the bathing water as a very necessary and once beautifully developed baby, because we had a great tradition of urban planning in Poland since the 19th century, truly. But it was really nearly completely cancelled in the year 2003 by not current political powers, but the, so to speak, left ancien regime, who decided that, in a way, I understand how to solve the unsolvable problem of transitioning from communism to capitalism without any other capital than the land, you know. That was, we had no Western Poland that would bail us out, you know. So that was really a tragedy, and the decision was made in the end of 1990s politically to go free American. And that is, moreover, this was fortified, I think, in the infamous year 2004, when one minister, with one single stroke of a pen, because he was a nouveau riche former communist, but ambitious, and he understood that a pen is an elegant implement. With one stroke of his pen, he really stroked all the plans that existed. Some of them were amended plans of the old age, but they still work. So we are only now reaching the point where we are honestly local spatial development plans, and in Krakow maybe even up to 80%, apart from the fact that they are really, that the act is imperfect, because one only plans flat, you know, there is no need legally to plan in the third dimension. However, also the very profession of the urban planners and urbanists was deregulated by the liberal government in the year 2014. So yes, liberal government is liberty, so they thought, you know. And they deregulated urban planners, so the chamber of the urban planners got deregulated. So there are problems on top of problems. I think the milk is spilled, and we are really dealing with spatial chaos largely, and on the other hand, in cities they are thriving and developing because they're still carry on the old qualities of perfect urban planning. You ladies spoke of Garden City.
Yes.
Ebenezer Howard was in Krakow, and he was completely enchanted. In the year 1912, he came and he saw one of the district of Krakow where I live, thanks God, because my father, as an architect, made it. You know, but he saw this settlement, that is the perfect completion of my garden city. So we moved from that to pretty much rapid development at any cost. And I have to say, I really had to control myself, stoical as I am, because you said 5,000 social flats per year.
Apartments per year.
Yes, apartments.
Get rent assistant.
Yes.
They get vouchers. They
But
don't
you are building how many?
not social. Altogether, the amount of residential units.
How many units are being built in Tel Aviv
a year?
In a year?
5,000, but they're not social. They're not social. They're for sale.
Okay, I would like to...
The market.
I only, want to end by saying Krakow is maybe building 250 units as communal housing. You know,
communal housing.
Communal, 2,050,
200.
250, yes. They are beautiful.
A year.
They are also quite nice, but, you know.
Quite nice, isn't it?
It's free American.
I want to... Yeah, one second. I would like to just add to this. Yes. So I think, thank you for saying that, because I think that what comes out of this discussion is that architecture is really somewhat a physical manifest of politics in a lot of
Always.
ways.
Yes. And of
Yes.
culture. Yes.
And yes, in the
Yes, of
transformation
course.
you're going through, and
Yes.
also in a sense
Yes.
we are going through here in Frankfurt and in Tel Aviv, where investors have a lot of power, really change the landscape.
Yeah.
And I would ask you to refer to that, but also I would throw out another question, and that would be the last question for today, because it's relevant to you girls. We are talking about history and architecture and what to learn from history. And we touch base also on the idea of the historic urban landscape, no? Because we're having a lot of pressure of development and how the city will look in the future, but there's no good city, I think, without sort of a, you know, a genius loci, a spirit of a space. And these urban masterpieces and vernacular sort of architecture that comes out of a society must be preserved as well. So there's a tension, no, between what we preserve and how we preserve it, not only architecture, but also, of course, the land around it, the urban landscape, but also the society and the diversity of society, the pluralism of society, and also, of course, craftsmanship, and we go on and on and on and on. So I think one of the most interesting things about urban planning today is how to learn from the past, really, and implement it into the future without losing this sort of sense of identity. So I'm sorry to have thrown another big question at you, but maybe you can go back and then force, and both of you can answer to this question.
I think the big challenge is not only to give the supply, just to build the
box,
yeah.
The shell.
Also the quality of life and the quality of the density situation, especially in Tel Aviv, the high-rise building, the dense of the, to promote the housing market, and all the intensive developers, the situation of developing the city. We have to do that. But we have also to promise the quality of life, and the quality of life is continue to the buildings, the identity of the building, the sense of the buildings, the landscape, the small gardens, the mobility, the sustainability mobility, the climate change, everything that we can. It's not just to build the buildings and to live, the quality and the way of life. And that's
what makes a city resilient in a way,
resilience, no? And that's the big challenge in very high and intensive situation of growth population and developing city and country. We are always on the have to look at both sides and to promote the situation and the city to be livable for the resident and for the commuters that come every day to Tel Aviv.
I think one of our future challenges, which was not mentioned in the list that we talked about, you know, sort of work that comes after you do a housing policy plan, is something that we learned when we were working on our policy paper, which is called naturally occurring affordable housing. You call it NOAH. Maybe a little bit like Noah's Ark, and that's when you when you have blocks of residential units which are already affordable because they're in not so good areas in the city, and they're small. They might be a little bit run down.
Simple.
And the rent there is the lowest in the city. And if we could find a way not to destroy these places, you know, retain the local identity that they hold and deal with the climate crisis through not destroying them, but through refurbishing them, then we would answer a lot of questions into one. So I think this is one of our future frontiers, to deal with the existing stock, to find ways to make it affordable for our citizens.
To feel it.
Thank you. I think that's a great finishing sentence you said there. Is there anything you would like to ask from the crowd?
I think everybody wants to join the party, but just
Yeah.
to our nice discussion today.
Gesamtkunstwerk. Gesamtkunstwerk. Integration of the arts.
Yes, integration of the arts and the culture.
Yes, music and architecture.
Yes. So yes, I want to thank you all for having this amazing discussion. And I think for me at least, it really comes down to this holistic approach that we all search for, on the one hand to develop, but on the other hand not to forget all the amazing things that our heritage has taught us, both globally and also vernacularly. And with this, I would like to finish this lecture series for today, and with the wish to continue and have this bilateral discussion with you, Germany and Frankfurt, on the challenge that we face in order to really learn from each other and see towards the future. Because I think in Tel Aviv, you know, there's such a pressure on development, and also the climate change has somehow arrived already because it's so hot. So I guess
In Krakow.
Frankfurt, yes, in Krakow maybe as well, but yeah, we can, I'm sure, enrich each other a lot with the knowledge that we have already accomplished in city planning. So thank you again, and see you next time.
Thank you.